Okay, so now on to part 2 of this playlist. In this video, I'll go over my generic template and explain how it evolved into what you're seeing right now. Recall the 4 steps from my previous video. First, as you can see, I choose black as my background color. It's actually slightly off black. I find going a little bit lighter is slightly easier on my eyes. It's all down to personal preference, but make sure you have a firm, solid decision on your background color before creating the rest of your standards. Second, I exclude any colors that I think will cause more harm than good. In this case, of course, I'm not using blue. I find it causes, for me, eye strain. Third, I reserve colors for specific purposes. I've reserved yellow for text, magenta for leader lines, red is for grid lines, and I tend to reserve white for miscellaneous reference lines, such as elevations and center lines. And the last step, of course, is to assign the rest of the line weights. The last step I mentioned will carry a much longer timeline with it than the previous 3 steps. You'll likely need to experiment with your line weights as you develop your standards. Adjusting line weights isn't difficult, however. Your line weights will vary greatly depending on your discipline. The line weights you're seeing in my template are geared towards structural and architectural drawings, mainly for building construction. They'd be a good starting point if you're involved in building design. In my previous video, I suggested not basing your line weights off pen colors. The line thicknesses themselves, however, are actually a good starting point. One thing to keep in mind is that computer-generated drawings offer us much more flexibility. Whereas back then, it would be very costly from a manufacturing perspective to introduce a limitless amount of pen weights. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how to actually create and adjust line weights. So we're going to go into the CTB file, but I'm not going to show you how to do every single modification. You'll have to go in there and experiment on your own. Okay, so I have some lines drawn. I'm going to turn that to a polyline just to better demonstrate. So I'll go into my CTB file. The easiest way to reach your CTB file is to go to the print dialog box, click here, and I'll show you how to create a new one in just a little bit here. So color 1, my red is set to 0.2 millimeters. For me, I find it easier to do my line weights in millimeters, but you actually have the option to either use inches or millimeters. I find inches ends up being strange decimals. So I'm going to go to the ACAD, or in this case GCAD. I'm using G-Star CAD. Go to No, go in here, and I'll show you what this looks like. It says use object color. It's going to go to preview. As you can see, this isn't very, you wouldn't want to plot like that, obviously, right? I'll just do a window. I'm going to use this part of my template to demonstrate this part of the video. Let's see, I want to do, let's see, full bleed, letter size, portrait. Yeah, I'll go to apply to layout preview. So the reason for this, if we go into the plot style table, everything says use object color. So one of the first things you'd want to do if you're creating your own plot style table would be set it to black. Because as you know, when we draw, usually most of the lines are black. So if you ever want to edit something, or sorry, if you ever want something to print to its color, you either go use object color, and this is what confuses people. I could actually set this to blue, save and close, preview. So red prints as blue now, so don't let that confuse you. I recommend just playing with these settings, and then you'll get a handle of what that CTB file is actually doing. At any point, if you want to create a new CTB file, the way to do that is to go to Save As. So, for example, if I want to do a slight modification on my generic CTB file, of course I go to Save As. If I want to start from scratch, I might go to Monochrome. As you can see, they have every color set to black. So I don't think creating your own CTB file is that hard, so I'm not going to get too into it, but I am going to show you what all the settings do. So I'm just going to go to Preview, see where we're at. Okay, so you can see how my red is printing as black. We'll just go in there and review it again. We'll go to color number 1. Color is black. I'm not really using any of these things. I could use grayscale if I wanted, but I don't really need to use it. Dither doesn't really do anything when my screening is set to 100. Pen number, virtual pen, I don't use these. Quite honestly, I don't know what they do. Screening, I'll get to that in a little bit. Line type, use object line type. I don't usually use this line type setting, but I will show you what it does. But anyways, first we're going to do line weight. Remember how that line printed relatively thin? I'm going to go all the way down to 3 millimeters. Save and close, go to preview. You can see what that did. It's a really thick, bold line. So while I have that line set to really bold line weight, actually I'm going to turn that down a bit just to make it easier for us to see what I'm doing. I'm going to adjust these end styles just so you can see what it does. I'm only going to do 2 of them. I just want you to know this setting because this can throw a lot of people off sometimes. I'm going to go with that, miter. I'm not sure if you know what changed, but I'm going to go in there again and fiddle with those settings once again. So you can see it squared off the end of the line. So we'll adjust that one more time. So unless you have a special reason for wanting to change these 2 settings, I would just suggest leaving it as default. I'll show you the fill style really quickly. Oh, that didn't work. Let's see what. Okay, so for whatever reason the fill's not working. I am using G-Star CAD, so sometimes some features don't work. Adaptive, I don't use that setting, but okay, I see what that does, but you just have to read the tooltip reference to figure out what that does. Okay, so let's change the color. Let's just put it red. Save the confusion. Go to preview. We now have a red line. I'm going to turn it back to black. I'm going to go to screening. I'm going to turn screening to 25. You can see it's faded now. Okay, so I'm going to fix everything, put that back to black, put screening to 100. And I think I had that on 0.2 millimeters. Okay, so back where we started. So now I'll quickly explain the line weights themselves. There's not much to them. They're really easy to edit, and they're stored within your CTB file itself. So as you can see, I have a bunch of line weights set to 0. The reason for that is because I only want 16 actual line weights used in my standards. This is because Revit also only allows 16 different line weights. So if I ever export CAD from Revit, I can match up my standards with that export much easier. So you'll notice I use millimeters, even though this is an imperial template. I find that the inches, it's harder to get a picture of how thick the line will be on screen. Whereas millimeters, I have a really good idea of what these lines will actually look like once printed. I go up to 3 millimeters, not any higher. The reason for that is if I need a thicker line, I'll just use a thickened polyline. I don't like having anything thicker than 3 millimeters because of course we're staring at line weights that are basically zero thickness. Every line on screen looks the same width. So if you make something way too thick in your plot style table, you might get unpredictable results once you actually print. So 3 millimeters is the highest I go, and these little check marks represent what's actually in use. So my standards currently only have a line 1.25 millimeters in thickness. As mentioned, you can just use a thickened polyline to represent any line work that's going to be thicker than whatever you have in this in your line weights in your CTB file. So that's all there is to line weights, not much to it. Next, I want to explain my layers. So of course this is a generic template, so every layer name more or less represents the line weight thickness I use on it. So just have a quick look. So I'm using G-Star CAD. It does not handle transparency very well, and that's why I have all these layers screened instead of transparent. If you have good performance and you are using AutoCAD, I recommend using transparency instead of screening for the line work itself. Screening, it generally prints better, but the drawback to screening, and you'll see it in just a little bit, is that it actually blocks out anything behind it in the draw order. So I take advantage of that. I have a wipeout layer, but just be aware that the screening, yeah, like if I have these hidden lines and they're drawn in front of the other line work, they'll actually create a look that doesn't look too great. I see it on a lot of drawings these days, and at least with transparency, if something is behind the transparent object, you can see it, it'll just be faded. So I think that's less worse than not seeing the object at all. And I'll quickly just give you an example of what I mean. I'll switch that to my wipeout layer. And we'll do another print preview. So as you can see, actually, let's do an even better example. I'm going to draw that to the back. So if this were transparent, if it were drawn in front, at least you'd see it. Anyways, it's a bit too much time spent on that topic. So yeah, you can just see my layers. I have my extra fine layers. The color for those is arbitrary. Number 2, fine, that's my leader line color. Just the magenta, I find I don't like drawing actual objects with it, but it really it's really easy to tell apart from other line work when I have these magenta leaders. So it's just what I'm used to, of course. Remember, your standards can be anything you want. So I have a phantom line layer, a center line layer. I have to change the line type scale, unfortunately, to see those. So what I've done with these layers containing associated hidden layers, I'll show you really quickly in my plot style table. So you have index colors, and you have colors. Yeah, so you have your colors 1 to 7. Each of these colors 1 to 7 has an identical color elsewhere in the color index. So color 1 and color 10 are the exact same shade of red. Color 4 and I think color 130 are the exact same shade of cyan. So what I've done to make my hidden layers is I've screened the identical color and given it the same line weight. So this is just a workaround for G-Star CAD not handling transparency well. If it did handle transparency well, then I'd simply use the same color for my hidden lines and make it transparent in the layer properties. So just keep that in mind. Screen layers. So I showed you how screening works in that plot style table. These layers I generally use, for example, if I'm making a building renovation drawing and I want to make the existing building faded, I'd use these layers. So I have the screening for shading and the screening for line work. I have some reference layers. So you can see a no plot layer, a view extents layer, and a viewport layer. And I have a layer for revisions. And that is simply a layer that is going to print to red, as you might have seen in previously in this video or the last video, and a wipeout layer. So I'll go back into my plot style table. I'll show you how those two layers work. So color 248 is my screening layer. Screening is set to 0. That means it'll just simply print as white. Color 240, the print color is set to the same index color. So everything will print like that. I'll go to preview. So as you can see, that little wipeout I have in my break line block, it blocks out the back of the wall. And of course the revision layer. The reference layers, they don't print because they're set to no plot in the layer properties. So one thing you'll notice is that I have these numbers in front of my layers, and this is really important, especially as we develop our standards further. When you're going through your layers, you want everything to be organized. A lot of people will just name the layer what it is, like concrete, cabinets, plumbing. The problem with that is your layers might not group in an ideal manner. So I find that putting a number or something in front of the layers just to make them all group very appropriately. So since I play around with my list code a lot, you'll see some layers appear in here that I don't want. A good way to get rid of those layers, especially if there's objects on them, is to simply merge selected layers too. But I won't get into that. Very arbitrary what I'm explaining right now, but your layers can be anything you want them to be, but just try to find some logical semblance of organization is my recommendation. Just don't indiscriminately name layers whatever, or it'll be really hard for other users to get a handle of your template. So just to conclude this part of the video, I'll just do a print of my little standard sample right here. Apply to layout preview. To end this video, I'll quickly just show you my styles. So I'll go into my text styles. Notice how I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Makes it really easy to grab your different styles if you have a number in front of them. My multi-leaders. Same thing, numbers in front of them. You can do anything you want, of course, but see if I can delete that. There. Can't delete standard, I guess. Can I rename it? Yeah, so you can't delete standard, but you can rename it, I guess. But anyways, as you see, everything's nice and organized. I actually use Lisp routines to call the different styles anyways, but if you ever need to change something, it's just nice to have, you know, everything in order. Same with text. And for that matter, same with layers. If they're all, you know, in order, it's easy to change the layer really quickly. Dimensions, I haven't developed them that far in these standards, but you can see no really order to them. And the last thing I have, I'm not going to cover in this video, however, is just any blocks you can include in your template, you should. So, a section mark, which I should have in these standards, but don't for whatever reason. Let's see. There we go. So that concludes everything I wanted to cover in this video. I will eventually add one more video to this series, likely just a quick overview of how I convert my generic standards into discipline-specific standards. Once you've made it this far, the rest is pretty easy, to be honest. It's likely that someone will ask if this template will be made available for download. I don't currently have a way to post it publicly, unfortunately. If you have any ideas, please let me know. Anyways, thanks very much for watching this video. I hope I've provided you with some helpful insight towards creating your own personalized set of CAD standards.